It happened in the middle of the school's Family Friday. Every parent was invited. Muffins, juice boxes, name tags, a short reading by the third graders in the cafeteria. The place smelled like syrup and plastic chairs. You could hear laughter from the kind of moms who wore matching yoga sets, talking about soccer schedules like they were White House briefings. And then, just as my son Max finished his turn at the mic and ran back toward me, smiling wide like sunshine, his father stepped up beside us. He didn't say hello. He didn't even look at Max. He looked straight at me. And with a voice that managed to be both flat and loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, he said, "Did you even remember to take your pills today, Susan, or is this one of your off mornings?" The word pills echoed. It hung there, between the juice table and the poster about positive parenting. I heard someone stop mid-laugh. A muffin dropped onto the linoleum floor behind me. Max froze. His smile vanished so quickly it looked like it had been wiped off with a hand. I didn't respond. My heart was pounding so loud it blurred the noise of the cafeteria. The teacher clapped to gather the next group of kids, and suddenly the room was moving again, but slower, like I was watching it all through water. And him? He just adjusted his tie and smirked, as if he'd just casually corrected a math mistake. No one said a word, not the moms at the next table, not the volunteer dads passing out juice, not even the school counselor, who glanced up and quickly looked back at her clipboard. That's how it always was. He could say anything, frame it just right, just public enough to embarrass, but still laced with concern so it didn't look like abuse. It looked like pity. For me. And I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I reached out and fixed the collar on Max's shirt, gently, quietly, as if nothing had happened. But Max wasn't okay. He looked up at me, not like a kid looking for comfort, but like a kid looking for confirmation that he wasn't imagining the cruelty, and I couldn't give it. I had promised myself I wouldn't break, not in front of him, not again. So I just touched his shoulder, the way mothers do when they're barely holding together but still want their kids to feel whole. He nodded slowly, then whispered, "He talks like he loves me, but it doesn't sound like love." It was the softest sentence, but it cracked something open inside me. My chest tightened. I brushed the hair off his forehead and kissed it, as if that could erase what he just witnessed. Then we turned to leave. My ex was still standing there, arms folded, eyes smug. And just as we passed him, Max turned his head, looked up at his father, and said, barely above a breath, "You lied to the judge, but I didn't." He didn't explain. He didn't raise his voice. He just walked away. Like a boy with nothing left to lose, and something far more powerful than fear in his pocket. Something that would turn the entire story on its head. And at that moment, I didn't know what he meant. I didn't know what he had. But I did know one thing. My son had finally stopped protecting him. I used to love the way he laughed. Not the forced chuckle he puts on now in courtrooms and conferences. I mean the real one. The one that showed up late at night when we played cards at the kitchen table, Max already asleep upstairs. The way his face would crinkle, and he'd toss his head back, like the whole world was suddenly light enough to carry. That was the man I married. And for a while, I believed that man still existed, buried beneath stress, work, the weight of fatherhood. I waited for him to come back, but he didn't. He evolved. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. I remember the day everything shifted. Not with yelling, not with cheating, not even with slamming doors. It started with silence. A different kind. Heavy, strategic. He stopped saying goodnight. He stopped asking if I needed help with dinner or if I had time for a walk. He used to take photos of Max doing the smallest things, picking dandelions, drawing on the sidewalk with chalk. Then one day his phone was always out of storage. He wasn't cruel. He was efficiently distant. And I made excuses for it. He's tired, he's pressured, he's just going through a phase. Until the night I heard him whispering on the back porch. The screen door creaked. I stepped out holding Max's lunchbox, meant to pack it for the next morning, but I stopped in my tracks. He was leaning on the railing, his voice low, soft, almost romantic. No, she doesn't even ask anymore. I think she knows she's losing it." I didn't say a word. I didn't even open the door. I just backed into the kitchen and sat on the floor. I held the lunchbox like a shield and tried not to scream. That's when I started to see the signs, everywhere. He would casually mention I seemed forgetful in front of our friends, offer to help me stay on top of things by managing the bills, and then sigh dramatically when I asked about money. He even told my mother once that I was spiraling a bit. Said it with that same sad head shake like he was just trying to help. He was laying a foundation, quiet, patient, brick by brick, and I was still sleeping in the same bed. When Max was 5, he started drawing pictures of houses split in half, one side with stick figures holding hands, the other with a figure all alone, gray, tiny, no face. I asked him who it was. He said, "That's the part of the house that's quiet all the time." I knew what he meant. And still I stayed. Because for every cold look and passive-aggressive jab, there were still moments, small ones, that made me believe maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back. Like the day Max was sick and I found my husband holding him on the bathroom floor, whispering lullabies I didn't even know he remembered. Or the night I broke down over a burnt casserole, and he rubbed my back in silence. No words, no judgment. But those were pauses, not proof. And then came her, the woman from his office. She was polished, confident, always perfectly styled even at school pickups. She introduced herself to me once, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and a voice that dripped just enough sympathy to feel like poison. "Must be so hard to juggle everything on your own? You're doing your best, though, really." That was the beginning of the erasure. From that moment on, I wasn't a partner anymore. I was a shadow attached to Max. She sat beside him at his school performance while I stood in the back. She brought gluten-free cupcakes to his birthday party while I was asked to just handle drinks. She posted selfies with him at the park, captioned, "Our little explorer, our." By the time the divorce was filed, I had already stopped correcting people when they assumed she was his stepmom. And in court, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't scream. He simply nodded solemnly and said I had emotional volatility and that Max thrived better in his care. He used the same charm he once used to win me over, now to make me disappear. I fought, of course I did. I showed up with notes, calendars, therapy reports, teacher statements. But all he had to do was say, "She's not unstable, she's just inconsistent." And they looked at me like they were sorry, like they already believed it. Only one person never looked at me that way. Max. Even on the days I couldn't get out of bed until noon. Even on the days my hands shook too much to pour milk. He'd crawl in beside me, hold his tablet, and rest his head on my shoulder like I was still solid ground. He never said much, but I saw it in his drawings. The houses were whole again. Small hands held together, smiling suns. That's what made me agree to go to Family Friday, even though I knew my ex would be there, even though I'd have to see him hand in hand with her, grinning like he earned the right to be proud. I went for Max. I dressed in his favorite color, lavender. I curled my hair. I packed his extra juice and his allergy-free granola bar. And when he saw me that morning, he lit up like it was Christmas. He said, "You look like the mom from the superhero movie." And for the first time in weeks, I believed I was. Even if just for him. But of course, life doesn't hand out grace without testing your grip. Because what waited in that cafeteria wasn't just muffins and microphones. It was humiliation. It was exposure. It was the beginning of the end for his carefully spun lies. He just didn't know. Max was watching everything. And Max had pressed record. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a public insult. Not the loud kind. Not angry. It's quieter than that. Like the air gets thinner, heavier, like everyone's suddenly pretending not to notice the train wreck that just happened in front of them. That's the silence that swallowed the Family Friday event the moment my ex said I looked unwell again. He said it with one hand resting casually in his blazer pocket, while the other stirred sugar into his coffee like he hadn't just shattered something sacred. The worst part, he said it to another parent. Loud enough for the folding chairs to hear, soft enough to make me look dramatic if I reacted. And all I could do was stand there, smiling through clenched teeth, eyes fixed on Max, who was waving from the stage as his class lined up to sing "This Little Light of Mine." I kept my hands folded. I kept my back straight. Because if I broke, even a little, they'd all nod and say he was right. We'd been seated near the back. I noticed that when I arrived. The sign-up list had gone out weeks ago, but somehow our names weren't on the class parent chart. His were. She was already there when I walked in. Her. The one with the French manicure and the fake empathy. She had her arm around Max like it belonged there, handing him a tissue with a smile that curled just a second too long. I stood at the edge of the room for 10 full minutes before anyone offered me a seat. And even then it was the chair with the broken leg, propped up by a folded napkin and barely able to balance under my purse. I laughed it off, quietly, because that's what moms do when there's no one left to fight for their dignity. But Max saw. He always sees. They had the kids stand in pairs, so naturally he was next to Jamie, the little boy he always shared lunch with. They held hands, sang in harmony, and when it ended, Max turned first to me. Not to his dad, not to her, to me. He smiled like nothing else existed, like none of the whispers, none of the tension in the room mattered. And in that second, I felt brave. Until she leaned over and asked too loudly, "Do you have someone picking you up, Susan? You shouldn't be driving if you're not steady." She said it sweetly, like she cared. Her lips were barely moving, but every head nearby turned just a fraction, just enough. I blinked. Hard. That was the moment I realized. I had been outnumbered before I even walked in. I turned to grab my coat, but Max beat me to it. "Let's go," I said softly. But he didn't move. He looked up at his father, then at her, then slowly at the crowd of parents who had gone back to their coffee and their muffins and their polite gossip. And then his little hand reached into his backpack. I didn't notice at first. I was too busy holding my breath, trying to pretend I didn't hear someone at the juice table say, "Poor thing. She always looks so lost." But Max, he was unzipping the smallest pocket, the one he always saved for his special rocks or his comic book sketches. Only this time he pulled out his old tablet. It was cracked in the corner. The screen lit up dull and flickering, but he held it like it was made of gold. "Max," I whispered, "let's get in the car, sweetheart." But he shook his head. Then he walked, straight up to the front, past the teacher, past his classmates, and stood right next to the microphone that hadn't yet been turned off. He didn't ask permission, he didn't look nervous. He looked calm in a way that terrified me. "Hi," he said, his voice crackling through the speaker. Every adult in the room turned. Some parents smiled politely, one woman even laughed. Until he said, "My mom's not crazy, she's just quiet. That doesn't mean she's broken." The room went dead silent. Then he tapped the tablet screen and the video started playing. The sound came through the mic. It wasn't perfect, but it was loud enough to hear. His father's voice, cold, sharp. "Let her fall apart in court. It's easier to win that way. Just don't let Max hear you say it. He still thinks she's worth something." Gasp. Someone actually gasped. I stood there frozen. The teacher moved toward him. A few parents stood. Someone whispered, "Is this real?" But it was too late. The truth was already out. And Max? He didn't flinch. He kept holding the tablet, eyes steady on his father, as if daring him to deny it. And his father, he turned pale. Palms opened, mouth twitching, hands suddenly unsure of where to rest. He stepped forward, reaching for the device. "Max, that's enough." But Max stepped back. "You said she was spiraling, that she needed help, but I saw you laugh when the judge believed you." Now the teacher froze. The principal, standing near the door, walked closer. Even she, the perfect one, backed away half a step. And for the first time in what felt like years, everyone looked at him like he was the problem. My throat tightened. I didn't cry. Not then. Because all I could see was my son, standing there, tablet still glowing, the room still quiet. And I knew. This wasn't just the moment they saw me differently. It was the moment he saw himself differently, too. There was a moment, just a single beat of silence, when time seemed to stall. It happened right after the judge leaned back in his chair, clearly irritated, and said, "Unless there's real evidence to counter these claims, I see no reason to extend custody discussions any further. The child is safer with the father." My heart didn't just drop. It cracked. And yet, as I turned toward Jacob, our 8-year-old son, ready to swallow my devastation and shield him from the worst of it, I caught a flicker in his eye. Calm, clear, intentional. Then Jacob raised his little hand. Not high, not dramatic, just a small, steady motion that cut through the room like a needle through fabric. "Your Honor," he said, his voice small but unwavering. I have something." The courtroom didn't know what to do with itself. People shifted in their seats. A few even chuckled uncomfortably. My ex, Greg, let out a soft scoff and turned toward the judge. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "He's 8. He doesn't—" But the judge held up a hand. "Let the boy speak." Jacob reached into the front pocket of his little gray hoodie and pulled out a tiny USB drive. He handed it to the bailiff without a word. I didn't know what it was yet. But he looked at me, just for a second, and in that second, I knew. It was the night of the video call. A week before the hearing, Greg had come to pick Jacob up late. He was yelling, again. I hadn't recorded him. But Jacob had set his school tablet on the table, camera facing the kitchen. No one noticed, not even me. On the courtroom monitor, the footage flickered to life. The timestamp was clear. Jacob's voice came first, nervous and quiet. Daddy, please don't yell. Then Greg appeared, full frame, pacing the kitchen like a storm in slacks and polished shoes. You think she's not crazy? He shouted. You think I want to deal with her anymore? That woman is a ticking time bomb. But they'll always side with the mom unless I prove she's unstable. He paused, picked up his phone and shook it in the air. I swear, I'll say whatever I have to say. You think a judge cares what's true? They care what's documented. Jacob's voice trembled. But Mommy didn't do anything. Greg slammed his palm on the countertop. You shut your mouth, Jacob. You don't defend her. You hear me? You defend me, or you'll wish you hadn't. Gasps rippled across the courtroom like wind over water. The video ended. No music, no fade out. Just silence, and it was the loudest silence I've ever heard. The judge sat there, completely still, like his brain was rebooting. The stenographer had stopped typing. Even Greg was motionless, his jaw slightly open, a single muscle twitching in his cheek. Jacob walked back to me and climbed onto the bench beside me. I wrapped my arm around him without thinking. You told me the truth matters, he whispered, even if you're scared. My ex stood up suddenly, face flushed. This is manipulation, he barked. She made him do that. She coached him. The judge finally spoke, his tone low and dangerous. Mr. Callahan, sit down. Greg didn't. You don't understand. She's been unhinged since the divorce. She cries all the time. She talks to herself. That'll be enough, the judge cut in sharply. Any further outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt. Greg's mouth closed, but his body still buzzed with fury. And then came the shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was unmistakable. The woman from the court-appointed family services team stood up. Slowly. Her clipboard in her hand, lips pressed tight. She looked at the judge. I'd like to formally revise my custody recommendation, she said, effective immediately. Greg spun toward her like he'd been slapped. You can't just... I said immediately, she repeated. One of Greg's attorneys leaned in, whispering frantically, but the man was unraveling. The confident smirks, the lawyerly charm, the tailored arrogance. Gone. What sat in his place now was something much smaller, exposed, cornered. The judge straightened his posture and looked directly at me. Ms. Adler, do you feel capable of continuing custody of your son, with appropriate support systems in place? My throat tightened. Yes, I said, barely louder than a breath. Yes, I do. He nodded once. I'm reversing the temporary custody order. Full custody will be restored to the mother. Supervised visitation for the father. This court is adjourned. And just like that, the gavel fell. I stood up slowly. My knees were shaking, not from fear, but release. As I held Jacob's hand and turned to leave, I felt the eyes again. Only this time, they weren't looking through me. They weren't judging me or waiting for me to break. They were watching something they hadn't expected. A woman who had been painted as broken, walking away stronger than they could have imagined. Greg tried to speak to Jacob, tried to block our path, but the bailiff stepped between us. Not today, sir. Jacob didn't flinch. He didn't even look back. We kept walking. And I swear to you, with every step out of that courtroom, it felt like the weight of 1,000 lies fell off my shoulders. Outside the courthouse, it was raining, not hard, just enough to blur the edges of the world. But Jacob didn't care. He tilted his head back, let the drops hit his cheeks, and smiled. You were so brave, I said, kneeling to his level. I didn't know you had that in you. He looked at me with those same clear eyes. You didn't have to know, Mommy, he said. You just had to believe me. And I believed you first. I hugged him tighter than I ever had before. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel crazy. I felt seen. I felt whole. And even then, I knew. This was far from over. Greg wasn't the kind of man who gave up. But in that moment, he wasn't the one in control. We were. We had told the truth, and it was louder than anything he'd ever screamed. There's a strange quiet that follows a storm, not the eerie kind, but the kind that lets you breathe for the first time in weeks. That's what it felt like as the courtroom slowly emptied after the judge dismissed the case. No custody change, no mandatory psychiatric evaluations, no restraining orders. Just silence. And in that silence, I turned to see my ex-husband, red-faced, jaw clenched, lips twitching like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. He looked smaller now somehow, like a balloon that had finally let out all its hot air. He didn't look at our son once. Not after that video. Not after his lies fell apart right there on the record. The video had only been 30 seconds long, but it didn't need to be more. A clip of me sitting on the couch, trying to calm down after a panic attack, while my son gently placed a glass of water in my hand. His tiny voice, off camera, whispering, "It's okay, Mommy. You're not crazy. You're just tired. Daddy always says mean stuff when you're not around." The court reporter's fingers stopped moving halfway through that line. Even the judge exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. My lawyer didn't have to say a word. After the ruling, my ex walked out. Stormed out, really. But not before muttering something under his breath that sounded like ungrateful brat. It wasn't clear if he meant me or our child. Either way, it didn't matter, because this time people heard him. The courtroom clerk narrowed her eyes. The bailiff stepped forward. Even the judge looked up for a beat, pen pausing in midair. He knew it was over. That moment unraveled more than just the custody case. A few days later, I got a message from the school counselor. She said one of the other parents had come forward after the hearing. Apparently, my ex had been telling other dads in the pickup line that I was unfit and needed to be locked up. He was trying to ruin me before I ever stepped foot in court, but after the video, nobody was buying it. The counselor assured me they'd updated his pickup permissions. He wouldn't be allowed near our son unless it was court-ordered. It never would be. Back at home, everything felt different. Lighter, somehow. Not easier, because healing never is, but freer. I could cook dinner without checking over my shoulder. I could answer the phone without that tight knot in my chest. And when my son laughed, really laughed, belly deep and wild, I didn't flinch, afraid it would somehow trigger an argument. He was finally safe enough to be a kid again. The part that surprised me, though, was what came from people I didn't expect. Aunt Rhonda, who'd stayed silent through everything, sent a text. "I watched the hearing. I was wrong. I'm sorry." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because apologies aren't invitations. They're just acknowledgments. And some acknowledgments come too late. Even my ex-mother-in-law, who once called me unstable at Thanksgiving, left a voicemail crying. "I didn't know. I thought you were just being dramatic. I didn't know he could be that cruel." But again, I didn't respond. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd outgrown the need for their validation. Justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't need an audience. It just needs truth. And the truth had already done its job. As for my ex, word got around that he tried to bring another custody claim, this time from a new county. But with the transcript and the video already on file, no lawyer would touch it. One firm even posted a vague tweet about turning away a narcissist who thought he could weaponize the system. It went mildly viral. I never confirmed anything. Didn't need to. The truth was already speaking louder than I ever could. Our lives now are quieter, but they're full. My son and I read every night, something we'd stopped doing when the tension in the house made even bedtime feel like walking on glass. He's sleeping better, eating better, smiling more. Sometimes I catch him watching that video again, not the way you'd think, not for the pain, but for proof. Proof that someone believed him. Proof that the truth mattered. And every time he does, he looks at me with this tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Like he's saying, "I got you, Mom." And in that moment, I know. He did. He really did. Some mornings now, the silence in our home is the kind that soothes rather than stings. Not the silence of walking on eggshells or of hiding tears in the bathroom, but the kind where peace has finally settled into the corners. I wake up, stretch slowly, and make my coffee while my son colors on the kitchen table, humming some made-up tune. There are no slammed doors, no angry footsteps pacing outside my room, just the quiet, steady rhythm of two people building something new, a life. He still sleeps with that same stuffed rabbit, worn at the ears, one button eye missing. And every night before bed, he asks if I'll stay for just one more story. Not because he's afraid anymore, but because now he knows I'll never disappear on him. That love, real love, stays. We don't talk much about what happened, at least not directly. Children have their own language for pain, but sometimes he'll say something in passing like, "Remember when Daddy said you were crazy? That was a lie, right?" And I'll nod. "Yes, baby, that was a lie." And we leave it at that. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it doesn't own us anymore. What I've learned through all of this is that healing doesn't come with a dramatic crescendo. It's not about the courtroom wins or even the apologies we never got. Healing is quiet. It's in the moment your child laughs from their belly again. It's in the way you learn to breathe without bracing. It's choosing not to fight every lie, but instead to live your truth louder. My ex still exists somewhere out there, still spinning his stories perhaps, still unable to see beyond his own reflection. But that's no longer my concern. I no longer spend nights rehearsing the arguments I wish I'd won. I don't stalk court forums or check his social media. I've let go. Not for him, but for me, for us. And I want to say something now from one woman to another. Or maybe from a mother to someone who never had the words before. If someone ever tries to define your worth by their fear, their shame, their twisted reflection of you, don't let them. Don't hand them the pen to write your story, because you are not a diagnosis. You are not a rumor. You are not a courtroom accusation. You are so much more than what they tried to reduce you to. And if you're a parent, if you're fighting in the dark, hoping your child still sees you clearly through the noise, I promise you this, they do. Even in silence, even in pain, they see, they remember. One day, like my son did, they may even surprise you with a moment that rewrites everything. I will never forget the way he looked at me in that courtroom. Small hand in mine, spine straight, voice trembling but sure. When he turned to me afterward, outside those courthouse doors, the wind catching his hair, cheeks pink from the cold, he just said, "I didn't do it to win, I did it 'cause you're my mom." And I cried, right there in public, but not from sadness, from relief, from love, from knowing that somewhere in all the chaos I had done at least one thing right. So if you're watching this right now, whether you're a mother, a father, a sibling, or just someone who's been made to feel small, let me say this. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not invisible. And if you've ever had to hold your dignity together with shaking hands while someone tried to tear you down, I see you. Drop a comment below if this story echoes something you've lived through. Or share it with someone who might need the reminder that truth has a voice. And sometimes, it comes from the most unexpected places. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Not just for stories like this, but for the reminder that every pain can lead to power, every wound can shape wisdom, and every voice, even the small ones, can change everything. Because sometimes, it's the quietest truths that echo the loudest.